The rain over Manhattan came down like shattered glass, relentless, glittering, and cold. Inside, New York Presbyterian, the night shift had just slowed to a fragile stillness. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above empty corridors. Doctor, Amira Johnson. Her scrubs damp with exhaustion. Pulled off her gloves and exhaled a long breath that tasted faintly of antiseptic and coffee. It had been another night of second chances. Hearts restarted, lungs reawakened, small victories pulled from the jaws of despair. She was used to this kind of quiet fatigue, the one that numbs, not breaks. Outside, thunder rolled across the Hudson. Amira walked toward the exit, thinking of her small apartment in Harlem, of the silence waiting there. But just as her fingers brushed the elevator button, the emergency doors slammed open. Coming through cardiac arrest. 2 paramedics burst in, pushing a gurney soaked in rainwater. A man lay on it, tall, broad-shouldered, his white shirt torn open, streaked with blood and stormwater. His skin was ashen. His lips had turned blue. Found him collapsed outside the Plaza Hotel. One of the medics shouted. No ID on him. He flatlined in the ambulance. We brought him back twice. Page trauma, Amira barked, instincts taking over. She ran alongside the gurney, snapping on new gloves. Her voice was calm, measured, but her pulse was running faster than the monitor beside her. They reached the trauma bay. She leaned over him, placing her palms squarely on his chest. Charged to 200, clear. The shock hit. His body arched, then fell still again. Nothing. One more time. 300. Clear. The second jolt. Still nothing. Rain pounded the windows like desperate fists. Her breath caught 3 minutes. The threshold between life and afterlife. And then, faintly, a tremor beneath her hands. A heartbeat. Hesitant, but there. A soft tone from the monitor broke the silence. He was back. Amira exhaled sharply, stepping away as nurses flooded in. Stabilize him. Get blood work and a full cardiac panel. She peeled off her gloves. Her fingers were trembling. When the adrenaline ebbed, she finally looked at his face, even unconscious. He was striking hair darkened by rain, jawline cut from some cruel, expensive marble. There was something restless in the angle of his mouth, like a man who never slept enough, never forgave enough. She didn't recognize him then. She only knew that for a moment, in the small miracle of that flickering heartbeat, she'd felt something she hadn't allowed herself in years' connection. Hours later, the storm had passed. The city glistened under dawn's watery light. Amira was still charting the case when the monitor beside her beeped differently. She turned. The man's fingers twitched. His eyes fluttered open pale gray. Distant, yet oddly clear. Their gazes met. For a heartbeat, the room went soundless. His lips parted, the voice hoarse but certain. You're my wife, he whispered. Amira froze. Excuse me. He looked at her again, more intently this time, not confused, not delirious, but searching, as if he was trying to remember a dream slipping through his grasp. You're my wife, aren't you? The nurse gasped quietly. Amira's hands clenched at her sides. You've had a trauma, she said gently. We revived you after cardiac arrest. Try not to talk too much. But his eyes never wavered. They were studying her, memorizing her face, tracing every contour as if it belonged to a memory he'd lost. She stepped back. I'm calling neurology, she murmured, though part of her voice was trembling. As she turned, he said quietly, You smell like rain. Her heart faltered for a second. By morning, the news had already reached the boardroom upstairs. The patient was Ethan Cole, Billionaire, founder of Cole Dynamics, the tech empire whose satellites covered half the world. He'd been missing for 36 hours after collapsing during a private meeting. More than that, he was a man shrouded in public grief. His wife, the model and philanthropist Isabel Cole, had died in a plane crash just a year before. Every headline since then had called him the widower of Silicon Valley. Now, he was lying in Amira's care, alive, lucid, and convinced she was his wife. When she entered his room again that afternoon, he was sitting up. IV lines draped neatly across his arm, eyes fixed on the rain-slick skyline. He looked smaller somehow, not in stature, but in the way grief bends even the powerful. She stood at the door. "How are you feeling, Mr. Cole?" He turned to her slowly. "Alive," he said, voice deep, raw. "Thanks to you." "You're lucky," she replied, checking the monitors. "Your heart stopped for 3 minutes." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's how long it took to find you." Amira stiffened. "Your memory's been affected. Confusion is common after." "I know who I am," he interrupted. "I know what I've lost. But when I opened my eyes, all I saw was you. Maybe that means something." She avoided his gaze, focusing on the charts, but her voice softened despite herself. "It means your brain is still healing, that's all." "Or maybe," he said, "it means I've finally seen something worth living for." She looked up sharply. For a moment, she wanted to scold him, to tell him that attraction born in crisis wasn't real, that hearts don't know gratitude from love. But then she saw the flicker of genuine pain beneath his calm. It disarmed her. People like him, billionaires, survivors, the untouchables, were never supposed to look human. And yet, here he was, stripped of armor, asking a stranger to anchor him to the world. That night, when the hospital quieted again, Amira sat alone in the break room. The rain had returned, tapping softly on the windows like a heartbeat. She should have been immune to moments like this, to men who looked at her like she was a miracle. But something in Ethan's voice lingered. "You're my wife." The words replayed like an echo, absurd yet haunting. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe the silence. But for the first time in years, she let herself wonder what it might feel like to be seen not as a doctor, not as a savior, but as someone loved. Then she caught herself. She closed her notebook sharply, as if that could end the thought. By dawn, Ethan's condition had stabilized. The hospital board arranged for a private wing, security, press restrictions, the works. Everyone treated him like royalty, except Amira. She remained professional, distant, precise. Until one afternoon, when he caught her in the hallway. "Dr. Johnson," he said, leaning lightly on the doorframe. "You don't believe in coincidences, do you?" "No," she said flatly. "Only consequences." He smiled slow, knowing. "Then maybe it's not coincidence that the woman who brought me back to life happens to be the one I can't stop thinking about." Her throat tightened. "You don't know me, Mr. Cole." "I know enough," he said. "You don't wear your wedding ring. You still check your watch before leaving every room, like time owes you something. And your eyes." He paused, almost reverent. "They look like they've forgotten how to rest." Amira inhaled sharply. "You should focus on your recovery, not on psychoanalyzing your doctor." He laughed softly. "Maybe I'm just trying to make sure my heart still works." His words unsettled her, not because they were flirtatious, but because they were too close to the truth. For a moment, she wanted to ask him why he'd been alone in the rain that night. Why a man with everything looked as though he'd already lost the world. But she didn't. Not yet. Later, when she passed by his room again, she saw him watching an old video on his tablet. A woman's laughter filled the room, soft, silvery, unmistakably loving. Isabel Cole. Ethan's expression was unreadable. Part grief, part guilt. When he noticed Amira, he quickly shut the screen. "Your wife?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Was a year ago today." Amira said nothing. She simply stood there, the hum of machines filling the space between them. After a long silence, he looked up at her. She used to say the heart remembers what the mind forgets. He murmured, "Maybe that's why. When I woke up, mine thought you were her." Amira's chest tightened. For the first time, she saw not the billionaire or the patient, but a man drowning in grief, clutching at whatever warmth he could find. She wanted to tell him that memory and love were two different kinds of survival. But the words never came. Outside, lightning fractured the sky again, sharp, white, inevitable. That night, as Amira stepped out into the parking lot, rain began to fall once more. She tilted her head up, letting it touch her face, cold, relentless, cleansing. Somewhere above her, in the penthouse ward, Ethan Cole was still awake, staring at the ceiling, his heart beating with mechanical precision, yet aching with something he couldn't name. Two souls, both haunted by ghosts, now tethered by an accident neither had chosen. And in that quiet space between thunder and memory, something began fragile, uninvited, but alive. The rain had stopped, but the air outside the hospital still smelled like metal and thunder. Inside, Ethan Cole refused to leave. He claimed it was for recovery observation, though his body was already healing faster than any chart could justify. The truth was simpler. More human he stayed because of her. Dr. Amira Johnson, the woman whose hands had restarted his heart, and whose silence now unsettled him more than death ever had. Amira saw through his excuses immediately. Every morning he'd find a new reason to delay discharge, a shadow on the x-ray, a mild arrhythmia, a phantom pain in his chest. He'd smile, that quiet, dangerous smile, the kind that dared her to argue. "You don't need a hospital," she told him one afternoon, arms crossed. "You need to rest. At home." He tilted his head, studying her with an infuriating calm. "I tried resting at home. Turns out walls don't talk back." Amira forced a thin smile. "Then talk to your therapist." "I'd rather talk to you." Her pen froze above the chart. "Mr. Cole, I'm not your therapy." He smiled, slow, devastating. "No, but you're the reason I survived mine." Something in her chest tightened. She hated that line. Not for its arrogance, but for the strange ache it stirred. So she turned away before he could see it. By the end of that week, the story leaked. Billionaire Ethan Cole, saved by Black Doctor in rainstorm and refuses to leave her side. Photos followed grainy shots of him in the hospital corridor, of her passing by, expression unreadable. Social media spun its own fiction. The savior and the sinner, the widower and the woman from nowhere. Rumors blossomed like mold in the dark. The hospital's PR department was a storm of its own. Amira's supervisor called her in, voice tight. "You've become a headline. Keep your distance. Smile. But not too much." She wanted to scream. Instead, she nodded because women like her, with brown skin and unconnected names, didn't get to make mistakes in rooms full of men with funding power. That evening, she walked into Ethan's room to tell him he was being discharged. Before she could speak, he handed her an envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "A proposal," he said simply, "for the hospital." Inside, she found a document stamped Cole Foundation. A multi-million-dollar grant to expand the cardiac research wing on one condition: that she become his personal physician for the next 6 months. Amira stared at him. "You think you can buy my time?" He leaned back, eyes gleaming faintly under the sterile light. "No, I think I can rent your expertise and maybe, in the process, remind myself what it feels like to live." "You're unbelievable," she whispered. He didn't disagree. That night, Amira sat alone in her apartment, the city outside glowing like a restless sea. She should have torn that contract apart. But the hospital needed it. The cardiology unit was underfunded, her residents underpaid. One signature could save hundreds of patients. yet she couldn't ignore the unease curling inside her. Working for him meant proximity, the kind of closeness that erodes boundaries, brick by brick. She stared at her reflection in the window, her tired eyes, the faint scar above her lip, the woman who had built her life on control. Why, then, did a single man's heartbeat feel like a crack in her armor? The next morning, she signed. Ethan watched her from the bed, expression unreadable. "So that's a yes," he said softly. "It's a professional arrangement," she replied. "Nothing more." "Of course." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll both pretend that's true." Their first day outside the hospital began in silence. His driver opened the door of a sleek black car. Amira hesitated before stepping in. The interior smelled of cedar and rain, too intimate, too quiet. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Home," he said. "My home." The penthouse stretched above the city like a glass ship, its windows swallowing the skyline. Every surface gleamed, untouched. No family photos, no flowers, no life. "Doesn't feel much like home," she murmured. He shrugged. It did once. When she turned, he was looking at her not with desire, but with that unbearable kind of curiosity that came from loneliness, too long unspoken. Days passed. She managed his medication, tracked his vitals, ignored his charm. But Ethan had a way of slipping through cracks, a remark, a question, a silence that pulled her in before she could retreat. "Do you believe people can be reborn?" he asked one evening, watching the city fade into dusk. She glanced up from her notes. "Medically or metaphorically?" "Either." "Medically, sure. I brought you back once." "And metaphorically?" She hesitated. "No, people don't change. They just learn to hide better." He studied her face. "Then maybe you haven't met the right reason to change." Amira closed her notebook. "Good night, Mr. Cole." But that night, she didn't sleep. His words lingered like the aftertaste of rain. It had been years since anyone had looked at her and seen more than a doctor, more than a woman who survived heartbreak by locking it away. And now, the man who shouldn't care at all was seeing too much. The next week brought a new storm, not of rain, but of revelation. A reporter camped outside her clinic, flashing questions about her relationship with Ethan Cole. Her colleagues stared longer in the halls. One resident whispered, "Must be nice to be the billionaire's favorite." Amira said nothing. But that night, she found herself trembling as she scrubbed her hands clean, as if she could wash off their judgment. When she confronted Ethan the next day, her voice was sharp. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? The spectacle, the control." He looked genuinely hurt. "I wanted to help your hospital by turning me into gossip. I didn't leak anything, Amira, but I won't apologize for caring." "Then stop," she said quietly. "Stop caring." He stepped closer, his voice low, almost pleading. "I can't. You woke me up, and I don't know how to go back to sleep." Something in her eyes faltered, but she turned away before he could see. That night, alone again. She stood by the tall glass window of his penthouse. The city stretched beneath her, alive, indifferent. Ethan was in the next room, pretending to read, pretending not to listen for her footsteps. She watched the reflection of the skyline flicker across the glass, the lights blurring like tears she refused to shed. How strange, she thought, that the man who has everything clings to someone who has already lost too much. She placed a hand against the window. The glass was cold, her palm warm, a reminder that she was still here, still fighting the urge to care. She whispered to the night, "You don't get to fix someone by loving them." But even as she said it, her voice betrayed her soft, uncertain, almost like a prayer. In the room behind her, Ethan watched her silhouette against the glass, the woman who had saved his heart, but refused to let him touch hers. He didn't know yet that her heart wasn't cold, only guarded. And she didn't know yet that his need for her wasn't about gratitude, but redemption. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly again, distant but inevitable. The rain was coming back, and with it, everything they'd both tried to bury. The city never really slept, but Ethan's penthouse did. It was a cathedral of silence, white walls, cold floors, glass so spotless it reflected nothing but emptiness. The place was expensive in all the ways that made life look perfect, and hollow in every way that mattered. At night, he sat in the living room surrounded by the quiet hum of machines that kept him alive, the oxygen meter, the faint pulse monitor, the sound of wealth pretending to be peace. He hadn't slept properly in months. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. Isabel, the woman he was supposed to die with. In the dream, she always turned toward him in the cabin, smiling, then light, then flame, then nothing. When he woke, his chest burned like it was still on fire. Amira found him there one night, the skyline bleeding silver behind him. He was barefoot, shirt half unbuttoned, staring into a glass of untouched bourbon. His eyes were rimmed with red, not from alcohol, but from memory. "You're not supposed to be awake," she said softly. He smiled without looking up. "I stopped following rules the night I outlived my wife." Her heart tightened, but she stayed calm. "Ethan, you need therapy, not another sleepless night." He finally turned toward her, eyes gray, haunted. "Therapy won't bring her back." "No," she said, stepping closer, "but it might bring you back." He let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "You think there's anything left of me to bring back?" Amira studied him, the tremor in his hands, the exhaustion hiding behind arrogance. "The body survives long after the soul gives up," she murmured. "You just forgot which one you're keeping alive." He looked at her, then really looked. There was no pity in her face, no softness, just a strange kind of truth that demanded to be heard. "Do you ever wonder," he asked quietly, "what the price of survival is?" Her voice was calm. "Every day." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She called me before the crash, begged me to come with her. I said I couldn't. Meetings, deadlines, mergers, all the nonsense that builds empires and kills people. The plane went down an hour later." His voice cracked. "And I'm the one still breathing." He rubbed at his chest, fingers trembling. "So tell me, doctor, what do you call a heart that beats only out of guilt?" Amira stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse flickering beneath his throat. "Alive," she said quietly. "Still alive." The words hung between them, fragile as breath. For the first time, Ethan didn't look like a billionaire, or a man people whispered about. He looked like a child who had been left behind by his own life. And for the first time, Amira felt something shift inside her. Not pity, but understanding. She sat down beside him. The city lights reflected off his skin, softening him, making him human again. "You don't have to do this alone," she said. He shook his head. "I'm not good company. Even my ghosts have started to leave." "Then let new ones in," she whispered. He turned to her, a faint, disbelieving smile tugging at his lips. "You make it sound easy." "It isn't," she admitted, "but it's possible." For a long moment, they sat there, two people bound by what they'd lost, pretending the night could hold them together. Amira's mind drifted to her own ghosts, the husband she'd buried years ago, the silence that had filled her afterward. Maybe that was why Ethan's pain felt so familiar. It mirrored her own, only colder, more expensive. She wanted to tell him that grief never leaves. It only changes rooms. But she stayed quiet. Sometimes. Words ruined the stillness that allowed two souls to breathe in the same air. Ethan broke it first. "You ever wish you could forget everything?" She gave a small, rueful smile. "Forgetting is easy. Remembering without breaking, that's the hard part." Later that night, she found him on the balcony, staring into the dark. The wind tugged at his shirt, and the city pulsed far below them, like a beating heart. "I can't keep doing this," he said quietly, almost to himself, pretending the world didn't end that day. Amira stepped beside him, the cold air slicing through her scrubs. "Then stop pretending." He turned to her, eyes glinting in the half-light. "And what? Just start over?" "Yes," she said. "Or at least, stop standing still." Something flickered across his face. Defiance. Then fear. "You talk like someone who's already figured it out." She met his gaze. "No. I just stopped running from the pain." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the wind. Then, slowly, Ethan reached out, his hand hovering just near hers, not touching, just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off his skin. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. "Because you remind me of what I used to be," she said softly. "Someone who thought healing was for other people." He looked down at her hand, then at his chest. "You think this thing still works?" She hesitated, then reached forward, her fingertips resting lightly against his sternum, beneath her touch. His heartbeat was steady but distant, like a drum in another room. "It's still there," she whispered. "That means there's still a chance." He closed his eyes. "It doesn't feel like living." "It doesn't yet," she said, "but it will." After she left, Ethan stayed on the balcony until the city faded into dawn. Her words played over and over in his mind. It's still there. That means there's still a chance. For the first time in months, he didn't reach for the bourbon. He just sat, listening to the rhythm inside his chest, trying to believe it belonged to him. Downstairs, Amira washed her hands, though there was no blood on them this time. She looked at her reflection at the exhaustion, the quiet ache of empathy. She had promised herself not to get close. Yet here she was, carrying someone else's pain like her own. Her phone buzzed, a hospital update, a reminder of the life she'd built on order and control. She almost ignored it. But then she noticed the message header, "Emergency, Ethan Cole's cardiac report." She froze. Attached was a scan, one she hadn't requested. The note beneath it read, "Abnormal rhythm detected. Possible relapse." That night, when she returned to his penthouse, he was waiting by the window, the city glowing beneath him like molten glass. "You look worried," he said. "I just got your report," she replied. "You're having episodes again." He smiled faintly, as if it were a joke. "I told you my heart wasn't worth fixing." Her voice sharpened. "That's not for you to decide." He met her gaze steady, unflinching. "You're wasting your time, Amira. I'm not trying to be saved." "Maybe not," she said quietly, "but I am trying to save you." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, without a word, she placed a hand against his chest again, feeling the uneven pulse beneath her fingers. It wasn't steady, but it was still there. Outside, thunder began to rumble again, soft at first, then louder, as if the city itself was remembering the rain. Amira withdrew her hand. "You should rest." He nodded but didn't move. His voice was low when he finally spoke. "Do you ever wonder," he said, "if some hearts just aren't meant to be healed?" She turned to him. "Every heart can heal. The question is whether it wants to." He looked away, toward the storm gathering beyond the glass. "Then maybe mine hasn't decided yet." In the distance, lightning flashed a brief, blinding slice of white across the sky. Amira watched it, thinking of the wall she'd seen in his eyes, built from guilt, grief, and the fear of being loved again. She didn't know it yet, but soon she would see what happens when that wall finally breaks. Because sometimes, the only way to save a heart is to let it break completely. The headlines hit like a storm. Black doctor seduces billionaire patient. Ethan Cole's new obsession. His healer. Every word was a knife, every photo a wound that wouldn't close. By morning, Amira's inbox was a battlefield reporters demanding comment, colleagues forwarding statements, the hospital board requesting an urgent ethics meeting. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating, neither would her heart. She sat in her office, hands still, eyes blank. The air smelled of bleach and panic. The screen in front of her displayed Ethan's face, the photo they'd taken when she'd walked beside him through the hospital lobby. Her expression was neutral. His was not. He'd been looking at her softly, intently, like the world had already written them a love story. Now the world had, and it wasn't kind. When she entered his penthouse that evening, Ethan was already waiting, pacing near the window, tie undone, fury barely contained. "They went too far," he said. "I've already called my lawyers. I'll sue the network. The papers." "Stop." Her voice was low, steady. "That will only feed it. Feed it." He turned toward her, eyes blazing. "They're destroying you. Amira, I can't just stand by." "You already are standing by," she said, crossing her arms. "That's the problem." His breath caught. "You think I want this? You think I enjoy seeing them turn you into a scandal? I think you enjoy having something to fight for," she answered quietly. "It makes you feel alive." For a moment, he said nothing. The silence between them hummed like static before a storm. "I'm trying to protect you," he said finally. She met his gaze, calm but cold. "Protect me from what?" "Ethan, the world, or the part of yourself that still needs to be forgiven." That night, she stayed only long enough to finish his treatment notes. Her hands moved methodically, but her chest felt tight, a cage of unspoken things. She could feel his eyes on her the whole time, searching for something she refused to offer. When she finished, she gathered her coat. "You need rest," she said. He took a step forward. "Amira." She turned, cutting him off with a glance that trembled despite her composure. "Don't," she whispered. "Not tonight. Why are you doing this?" "Because I don't know who I am when I'm around you anymore," she said softly. "And that terrifies me." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "Amira, please." Her voice cracked. "You can save my career, Ethan, but who saves me from myself?" And with that, she left. Outside, rain had begun to fall again, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the street like it was trying to wash something away. Amira walked without an umbrella, her breath coming in ragged bursts, her reflection fractured in the puddles beneath her feet. She didn't hear the car door slam or the hurried footsteps behind her until she heard his voice. "Amira, wait." She turned just in time to see him stumble out into the rain, jacket half on, face pale as ash. "Go back inside," she called out. He ignored her, crossing the street toward her. "Ethan, stop," she shouted. "You're not—" But before she could finish, his hand clutched at his chest. He faltered. 1 second he was upright. The next, he was collapsing into the water, the world folding around him. "Ethan." The street erupted into chaos, sirens, shouts, the metallic wail of fear. Amira dropped to her knees beside him, rainwater and tears blurring together. "Don't you dare," she hissed, pressing her palms to his chest. "Don't you dare do this to me again." His pulse was fading. Her fingers trembled, slipping on the soaked fabric. She tilted his head back, performing compressions as if the storm itself was her metronome. 1, 2, 3. "Come on, Ethan," she whispered, voice cracking. "You don't get to quit now." She bent lower, pressing air into his lungs, her lips trembling against the taste of rain and salt. Again, again. "Please," she breathed. "Please, not like this." Her hair clung to her face, her hands slick with mud and desperation. Then faintly a cough. His body jerked, water spilling from his lips. His eyes opened, dazed, unfocused. Ethan, she whispered, pressing his face between her hands. Stay with me. He blinked at her, rain streaking down his cheeks. You came back, he murmured. I never left, she said, though they both knew it was a lie. The ambulance arrived minutes later. Flashing red lights carved through the storm, painting everything in pulses of blood and lightning. Paramedics swarmed around them, lifting him onto the stretcher. Ma'am, we've got him, one said, gently pulling her back. But she clung to Ethan's hand until they forced her fingers free. Keep pressure on his chest, she ordered, voice sharp, automatic, the doctor in her fighting the woman she'd become. Amira. Ethan's voice was barely audible over the sirens. She leaned in. What? He smiled weakly. You still smell like rain. Her throat tightened. Don't talk. He chuckled faintly, eyes fluttering shut. Then, listen. And then he was gone again. Not gone, but drifting, unconscious, as the doors slammed shut between them. Hours later, in the sterile brightness of the emergency ward, Amira sat alone outside the operating room. Her scrubs were soaked through, her hands still trembling. She could feel every heartbeat in her body, and for the first time, it terrified her. She'd promised herself she wouldn't care, that he was just a patient, a man broken by grief and money. But the truth hit her like lightning through glass. She was terrified of losing him, not because of duty, because of love. When the surgeon finally emerged, she stood before he could speak. He's stable, the man said. You saved his life again. Dr. Johnson. But his heart can't take another shock like that. He needs rest. And peace. Peace. The one thing neither of them knew how to keep. She thanked him quietly and slipped into the dim recovery room. Ethan lay pale against the sheets. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor, the only proof he was still here. She sat beside him, her hand hovering above his, not touching. Not yet. I told you not to make me forgive you, she whispered, but I already have. The rain outside softened into drizzle. The city lights flickered across the window, golden and broken. Hours passed. Ethan stirred faintly, his voice a rasp. Amira, I'm here. His lips curved in the faintest smile. You shouldn't be. I know. You still stayed. She closed her eyes, because I couldn't bear not to. In the hallway, voices murmured the board members, the PR team, the vultures circling again. Tomorrow would bring consequences, investigations, public scrutiny, maybe even suspension. But tonight, there was only the sound of his breathing, steady and fragile. She leaned closer, pressing her forehead against his hand. You want to know why I ran, she whispered. Because you make me feel alive, and I forgot how to handle that. His fingers twitched, barely there, but she felt it. A silent answer. Something inside her broke not in pain, but in surrender. When dawn finally came, the sky outside his window turned a pale, forgiving blue. Ethan was still asleep, his face softened, his heartbeat steady beneath the machines. Amira rose quietly, brushing the damp hair from her face. She looked at him one last time before leaving the room. The city was waking up, already hungry for another story. But somewhere between thunder and heartbeat, something had shifted a crack in the wall she'd built, wide enough for light to slip through. When Ethan woke, the world felt quieter than it should have. No rain, no thunder, only the distant hum of monitors and the sterile rhythm of machines keeping time with his heartbeat. Light poured through the blinds in thin, silver ribbons. His chest ached when he breathed. But it wasn't pain that made him turn his head. It was instinct. She was there, Amira, sitting by his bedside, still in her scrubs, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. For a long time, neither of them spoke. It was Ethan who broke the silence. Why did you save me? His voice was hoarse, fragile. A whisper dragged from somewhere deep. twice. Amira didn't look up. She stared at the steady line on the monitor, tracing it with her gaze, as if it could hide her trembling. "Because you didn't deserve to die," she said finally. Then, softer, almost to herself. "And because I once lost someone I couldn't save." Ethan's eyes shifted toward her. "Someone you loved." She nodded once. "My husband." For a moment, the only sound was the slow, deliberate rhythm of his breathing. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer sympathy. He just waited the way a man waits when he knows the truth is about to break something open. Amira drew in a breath that shook on the way out. "He was a firefighter," she said. "The kind who ran toward flames when everyone else was running out. I used to hate that about him, the way he believed every life was worth saving, even his own second chance." Her eyes drifted toward the window, where dawn was spreading like a bruise across the city. "There was an apartment fire downtown," she continued. "I was on call that night. They brought in a dozen victims. He was one of them. Third-degree burns. Smoke inhalation. We did everything, and it still wasn't enough." Ethan watched her, chest tight, as her voice cracked for the first time. "I tried to revive him. I kept going long after everyone else stopped. They had to pull me away. I remember screaming his name, thinking if I just tried harder, if I loved him enough, maybe he'd come back." She exhaled a broken laugh, soft, hollow. He didn't. For the first time, Ethan didn't know what to say. He'd spent his life surrounded by people who spoke in numbers and deals, who turned emotions into transactions. But there was no language for this kind of loss, only silence. He looked at her, the woman who had saved him from dying, and realized she was still bleeding from a wound no one could see. "That's why you were so angry when I wouldn't fight," he said quietly. "Because you saw him in me." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Because I can't go through it again watching someone I care about give up." He tried to smile, but his throat was tight. "You care about me." Her lips parted, caught between truth and defense. "Don't make me say it." He held her gaze, unflinching. "I just almost died in your arms." "Amira, I think you already did." A faint laugh escaped her, half sob, half surrender. "You never know when to stop, do you?" "Not when it comes to you," he said. That silence again, thick, electric, charged with everything they hadn't dared to name. Then Ethan whispered, "Maybe that's all we need to learn, not how to move on, but how to stay, even when the world falls apart." Something in those words hit her harder than any confession, because staying, not running, not fixing, was the one thing she'd never been brave enough to do. For days, Ethan's recovery was slow but steady. He refused visitors, ignored business calls, and spent most of his time watching the light shift across the walls. Amira came every day, sometimes to check his vitals, sometimes just to sit in silence beside him. But even silence can grow dangerous when two people have too much unsaid between them. One evening, he asked, "What happens after this?" She frowned. "After what?" "This," he said, gesturing weakly to the monitors, to her presence. "When I get better, do you disappear?" Amira hesitated. "You'll go back to your life, Ethan, the one you had before all this." He smiled faintly. "The one where I was dead inside." Her jaw tightened. "You were grieving." "So are you," he said. "But at least I'm trying to live again." The words struck deeper than he intended. She turned away, blinking fast, her composure slipping. He softened. "I didn't mean." "Yes, you did," she cut in, voice trembling. "And you're right." That night, when he fell asleep, she stayed longer than usual. She watched him, the rise and fall of his chest, the faint twitch of his fingers as if still reaching for something even in dreams. She'd built her life around control, around keeping people at arm's length, so they couldn't leave her again. But sitting there, She realized how much she'd already let him in. Maybe too much. Amira reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, her fingers barely grazing his skin. "You don't know what you're doing to me," she whispered. Then she stood, gathering her coat before her heart could betray her again. Outside, the city was quieter than she'd ever seen it. Rain clung to the pavement in thin mirrors, and every reflection looked like a version of herself she didn't recognize anymore. For years, she'd carried the weight of a dead man's memory. Now, she carried the pulse of one who refused to die. And somehow, both burdens felt the same, heavy, human, real. She paused beneath a streetlight, closing her eyes. For the first time since her husband's death, she prayed not for healing, not for forgiveness, but for the strength to stop running. The next morning, she returned to the hospital to find Ethan sitting up in bed, sunlight spilling across his face. He looked stronger, more alive, and yet there was something distant in his expression. "Rough night?" she asked. He glanced at her, a hint of mischief breaking through the melancholy. "Only if you count the dreams." "What did you dream?" He smiled faintly. "That you were standing in the rain again. Only this time, I didn't collapse." Amira tried to hide her smile, but failed. "And what happened instead?" He shrugged, gaze steady. "You stayed." Her pulse stumbled. "Maybe I will," she said softly. "If you do the same." His reply was quiet but certain. "I'm not going anywhere." Later that day, as she reviewed his latest scans, she noticed something strange, an irregular rhythm. Faint but persistent. It wasn't life-threatening yet, but it was there, an echo of the storm that had nearly killed him. When she told him, he only smiled. "Guess I still have a rebellious heart." Amira's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's not a joke." "I know," he said gently, "but it's also not the end." She looked at him then, truly looked the man who had lost everything, but still dared to believe in something new. And in his eyes, she saw not defiance, but quiet determination. Maybe survival wasn't about beating death. Maybe it was about finding someone worth living for. That night, as she prepared to leave, he called after her. "Amira." She turned. "Yes." He hesitated. "You once said you were afraid of loving someone who might leave. So, what happens if the person you love is already halfway gone?" She stared at him, words caught in her throat. Then, finally, "Then I'll hold on to the half that's still here." Ethan's smile was soft, almost broken. "You really are my cure." She shook her head, eyes glistening. "No, Ethan, you're just finally choosing to heal." Outside, thunder rumbled again in the distance, low, rolling, like a memory returning. Amira stood by the window, watching the light break over the city. Behind her, Ethan's heartbeat monitor hummed a steady rhythm. But deep down, she knew peace never lasted long for hearts like theirs. The past had a way of finding the cracks, and somewhere in the quiet between one breath and the next, that past was already knocking. The hospital lights burned white and merciless. It was 3 a.m, the hour when even hope begins to doubt itself. Ethan was nowhere on the ward. His bed was empty, his chart missing. For a heartbeat, Amira thought he had run again until she saw the red light glowing above operating room 3. Her blood turned cold. When she burst through the doors, the scene before her froze her in place. Ethan Cole, pale and motionless, being prepped for open-heart surgery. His private medical team stood ready, men she didn't know, faces hidden behind surgical masks. "What is this?" she demanded, voice sharp with panic. One of the surgeons turned, startled. Mr. Cole insisted on proceeding tonight. He didn't want to delay. "Without clearance, without me," she cut him off. Ethan's voice, faint but steady, came from the table. "You weren't supposed to find out." She stepped closer, trembling. You lied to me. He managed a small Yokoha. Crooked smile. Would you have let me do it if I told you? No, she said, her throat tightening. Because you're not ready. That's exactly why I need it now, he murmured. I can't live like a ghost anymore. Amira, either my heart works, or it doesn't. She looked at him, at the stubborn, reckless man who had fought everything but his own pain, and realized she couldn't stop him. Not anymore. So she did the only thing left. Everyone out, she said quietly. I'll do it. Minutes later, she stood scrubbed in, gloved hands trembling over the sterile field. The other doctors had cleared the room. Only the anesthesiologist remained, eyes flicking between them. The temperature dropped as the OR doors sealed shut. Machines hummed in the stillness. A low, steady rhythm echoed through the speakers, the sound of Ethan's fragile, failing heart. He watched her through the haze of anesthesia, his gaze soft but unyielding. If this goes wrong, it won't, she said quickly. But if it does, he whispered, tell me you'll let me go. Amira's lips trembled. No, not again. He smiled faintly, eyes fluttering shut. Then I guess I'm in good hands. When his consciousness slipped away, she began. The incision was precise, her hands moving on instinct, guided by years of practice and something more primal fear. Love. The raw need to keep him tethered to this world. The scent of antiseptic filled the air. The heart monitor beeped once, twice, then faltered. Her breath caught. Come on, Ethan, she murmured. Don't you dare leave me again. Inside the cavity, the heart looked fragile, bruised by time and grief. She worked in silence, each motion a prayer disguised as medicine. The replacement valve slid into place with the delicate certainty of fate, or perhaps defiance of it. When the time came to restart, she pressed the paddles to his chest. Charging, clear. His body jerked. The monitor stayed flat. Again she commanded, 200 joules. Another shock. Still nothing. Amira's pulse thundered in her ears. Come back, she whispered, leaning over him, voice trembling but firm. You owe the world one miracle. She pressed the paddles again, tears streaking down her mask. Now, damn you, breathe. And then faintly, stubbornly, the monitor chirped. A heartbeat. Weak, uneven, but real. Her knees nearly gave way. The room erupted in quiet, controlled relief. She lowered her hands, whispering through the static of her headset. Welcome back, you impossible man. When Ethan opened his eyes hours later, it was still dark. The room glowed softly, monitors blinking, oxygen hissing, rain tapping against the window pane. Amira was there, sitting beside him, her posture rigid with exhaustion. Her hair had escaped the surgical cap, curling damply against her neck. She looked like she'd aged years in a single night. His voice came out rough. You stayed. I had to make sure you didn't run off again, she said lightly, but her eyes betrayed her red, swollen, fragile. He smiled faintly. Did it work? She nodded. It did. You're stable. Alive. She hesitated, then met his gaze. For now. He laughed weakly. I'll take for now. It's better than most of my odds. They sat in silence for a while, the space between them thick with things unspoken. Finally, Ethan turned his head, studying her with that same quiet intensity that had once unnerved her. Do you believe in destiny, Amira? She blinked, caught off guard. Destiny. He nodded, eyes half-lidded. The idea that everything happens for a reason, that maybe I was meant to meet you this way. Her lips curved into a tired, wistful smile. No, I don't believe in destiny. His brow furrowed. You don't? She shook her head. I believe in choice. In the moments we create, not the ones we're handed. He watched her carefully. And what about now? What about it? He reached out, his fingers brushing hers weak, trembling. But sure, then choose me, he said softly. Not because you feel responsible, not because I'm your patient. Choose me, because of your heart. The words hit harder than he knew. Amira froze, every wall she'd built shivering under the weight of his voice. She could have pulled away, could have told him he was still sedated, still confused. But she didn't, because for once, she didn't want to lie, not to him, not to herself. She closed her hand around his. You don't make it easy, Ethan. He smiled. Life never does. Over the next few days, recovery came in fragments. Ethan's body healed faster than expected, but his mind and hers remained tangled in the quiet aftermath of everything that had been said. Reporters waited outside the hospital gates. The board whispered about boundaries and consequences. Amira faced meetings, questions, threats, but through it all, she found herself coming back to one truth: she didn't regret saving him. Not even a little. At night, she'd sit by his bedside, pretending to review notes while he slept. But her eyes always drifted to him, the faint rise of his chest, the flicker of pulse in his wrist. Proof that miracles didn't always come from heaven. Sometimes. They were carved out by trembling hands under surgical light. On the fifth night, Ethan spoke again, voice softer than the monitor's hum. You know what they say about hearts. Amira looked up. What? They don't break. They reset. They stop beating the old way so they can learn a new rhythm. She smiled, quiet and sad. And what if that rhythm hurts? He met her eyes. Then maybe that's how we know it's real. Later, after he fell asleep, Amira stood by the window watching the city lights flicker far below. The world outside was still cruel, still loud, still ready to tear them apart. But in this room, for now, there was peace. Her reflection merged with his, two shapes blurred by glass and exhaustion, but alive. She placed a hand over her own heart and whispered, I choose to stay. And maybe, for the first time in years, she meant it. As dawn crept in, painting the room gold, Ethan stirred again. His eyes fluttered open, finding her silhouette in the light. You're still here, he murmured. She smiled faintly. So are you. He closed his eyes again, whispering, Then maybe we're finally where we're supposed to be. Amira turned toward the rising sun, her expression unreadable. Because somewhere deep inside, she knew the world wasn't done testing them yet. Love, like surgery, always came with the risk of reopening what had barely healed. And far below the hospital, down in the city's restless heart, a new headline was already forming. The air in Maine smelled different, cleaner, softer, like the world had finally remembered how to breathe. When Amira and Ethan left New York, they didn't make an announcement or a plan. They simply packed their lives into the trunk of a single car and drove north until the noise faded. It wasn't running away. It was returning to something they hadn't realized they'd lost: quiet. The town they chose was small, a place where the ocean met the pines, and everyone still waved from their porches. There were no skyscrapers, no reporters, no eyes watching for cracks, only the distant hum of seagulls and the smell of salt in the wind. Amira opened a small clinic in an old white cottage by the harbor. It had peeling paint, crooked shutters, and a warmth she hadn't felt since her residency days. The sign out front read, Harbor Women's Health. Care, not conditions. She specialized in infertility treatment, offering free consultations to women who couldn't afford the city's hospitals. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And Ethan, true to his word, became her silent benefactor. The donations came under an alias, tucked inside brown envelopes with no return address. She knew it was him. He knew she knew. Neither said it aloud. It was their unspoken language love that didn't need to perform. Life settled into something that almost resembled peace. In the mornings, Ethan made coffee in the kitchen that smelled of cedar and sunlight. His hair was longer now, his scars fading but still visible, a map of everything he had survived. Amira would sit by the window, reading patient charts, while he hummed off-key to the radio. Sometimes he'd bring her a mug and say, "You need sugar," even though she didn't. In the afternoons, she treated patients, young couples holding on to hope, women who'd been told never, and mothers who came just to say thank you. In their stories, Amira found pieces of herself. In their courage, she found what healing really looked like. And every evening, when she came home tired but content, Ethan would be waiting on the porch, on the beach, or by the stove like a man relearning how to live without fear. One night, they sat by the shore. The tide whispered secrets to the sand, and the stars reflected off the water like scattered glass. Ethan tossed a pebble into the waves. "You ever think about New York?" Amira nodded. "Sometimes. Not the city, just the people we were there." He glanced at her. "Do you miss her? The woman who never stopped running?" She smiled faintly. "No. I think she finally found somewhere to rest." He was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What about him?" "Who?" "The man who thought money could fix a broken heart." She looked at him, really looked. "He didn't fix it," she said softly. "He learned how to let it heal." As weeks became months, the rhythm of their lives grew steady. Yet peace, Amira learned, was fragile. Some nights, she would wake to find Ethan standing by the window, staring at the horizon with that faraway look she remembered from New York. The look of someone still half afraid the past might knock on the door. His health was better, but his heart still misfired, occasionally small flutters that made her chest tighten every time she heard the monitor beep. "You should rest more," she'd tell him. He'd smile, teasing. "You say that like rest is easy. Try pretending it's a challenge," she'd reply, and he'd laugh softly before letting her pull him back to bed. But inside, she never stopped worrying. Because no matter how strong he looked, she knew the body doesn't forget trauma, just learns to live around it. And sometimes, love felt exactly like that. Autumn came, painting the town in gold and fire. The clinic flourished. One afternoon, a young patient named Grace, barely 20, burst into Amira's office, crying. "I'm pregnant," she said, laughing through tears. Amira hugged her, and for the first time in years, the tears that slipped down her own face were ones of joy. That night, she told Ethan about Grace over dinner. He listened quietly, eyes warm. "You gave her a future," he said. Amira shook her head. "No, I just reminded her she had one." He reached across the table, fingers brushing hers. "That's what you did for me too." She looked down at their joined hands. "You're not my patient anymore, Ethan." "I know," he smiled. "I'm your miracle." Her laugh was soft, but her eyes shone. "You're definitely something." The first snow fell early that year. The world turned silent, wrapped in white. They built a fire in the old stone hearth and sat close, wrapped in blankets and half-forgotten thoughts. Ethan broke the quiet first. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. He hesitated, the firelight flickering across his face. "If I lost everything, my money, my name, all of it, would you still stay?" Amira's gaze met his, calm and sure. "If you still had your heart," she said, "I'd still be here." He exhaled a shaky laugh, the kind that sounded like a man trying not to cry. "Then I guess I'll make sure it keeps beating." But beneath the warmth of that promise, something darker lingered, an unease that neither of them spoke of. Because the world had a cruel way of testing fragile peace. A letter arrived one morning, postmarked from New York. It was official, stamped, sealed. and bearing the cold insignia of the hospital board. A summons for review. Her name, his surgery, the unauthorized operation. Amira read it once, twice, and her hands went still. Ethan found her at the kitchen counter, the letter trembling between her fingers. "What is it?" he asked. Her voice broke. "They're reopening the investigation." He took the paper from her, scanning it silently. His expression hardened. "They can't take this from you." She swallowed. "They can, and they will." He looked at her, then the woman who had rebuilt herself from ashes, and said quietly, "Then we fight." Amira stared out the window, where snow kept falling, soft and relentless. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe peace could last. But as she traced the edge of the letter, she couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't over. It had only learned how to wait. The city had changed, or maybe it was they who had. Maine's quiet years felt like another lifetime now. A soft dream folded beneath the weight of everything they had built since. The ballroom was a sea of gold and glass that night, filled with laughter, camera, and applause. But for Amira, all the sound blurred into a hum. She stood near the edge of the stage, fingers laced tightly together, watching the man at the podium, the man whose heart she had once restarted with her trembling hands. Ethan Cole, older now, silver at his temples, held the microphone as if it weighed more than it should. His voice, calm and deliberate, carried across the hall. "She once told me," he said, pausing just long enough for the room to still. "As long as the heart beats, there's still a chance." The audience leaned in, drawn by the gravity of that simple line. "Because of her," Ethan continued, "I learned that love isn't salvation. It's courage, the courage to keep living, even when you think you can't." The lights shimmered against the polished floor. Behind him, the banner read, "Cole Johnson Foundation for Women in Medicine." It had taken years of work and a war fought in silence to get here. After the inquiry, after the accusations, after the near collapse of everything they'd built, Amira had walked away from the operating table for good. But Ethan hadn't let her legacy die in the shadows. He rebuilt it with her this time, not for profit, but for purpose. The foundation funded scholarships for young women in medicine, especially those from backgrounds like hers, the ones no one had believed in. And tonight was its beginning. As Ethan spoke, his gaze found her in the crowd. It was subtle, a flicker, a pause, a thread pulled tight between them in the noise. For a second, time folded. He didn't see the doctor or the founder or the woman standing in the spotlight. He saw her, the woman in the rain, the one who had knelt beside him when his heart refused to beat, who had taught him how to stay. Amira blinked hard, swallowing the ache that rose in her chest. How strange, she thought, that after all these years, the sound of his voice could still steady her pulse and break it all at once. When the applause came, it was thunderous. Cameras flashed. Ethan stepped away from the podium, his expression softening as he approached her. Still nervous, he asked quietly, though he was the one whose hands trembled slightly. Amira smiled. "You just quoted me in front of 300 people. I think you've earned the right to be nervous." He laughed, that quiet, worn laugh that came from a man who had lived enough to know the weight of peace. "I didn't quote you," he said. I confessed. Her heart stuttered, like it still hadn't learned the rhythm of him. "Confessed what?" "That everything I am," he said, eyes never leaving hers, "is because you didn't stop when everyone else did." Amira's throat tightened. "I didn't save you, Ethan. You saved yourself." "Maybe," he said, "but you gave me a reason to try." The gala ended hours later, but neither of them left immediately. They wandered outside, escaping the crowd, into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered on the Hudson like a reflection of another life, the one they had both survived. Ethan loosened his tie. "You ever think about Maine?" Amira smiled faintly. Every time I smell rain." He chuckled. "I still make coffee too strong. And I still pretend to like it," she said softly. Their laughter faded into something gentler, something filled with the quiet gratitude of people who had seen death and chosen life anyway. They walked along the waterfront until the noise of the city fell away. Ethan stopped first, turning to face her. His breath came out in a soft white cloud. "I had another scare last month," he said finally. She froze. "Your heart?" He nodded. "Just a flutter. Nothing major." "Ethan." He reached for her hand. "Hey, I'm okay. It just reminded me how much time we waste pretending we have forever." Her eyes softened. "And what are you planning to do with the time you have?" He smiled, not the charming kind the world knew, but the quiet, broken, real one she loved. "Spend it reminding you that you gave me mine." They stood there in silence for a long moment. The night breeze brushed through her hair. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed faint, familiar, but fading fast. Ethan's fingers tightened around hers. "Do you ever regret it? Walking away from surgery, from the hospital, from all of it?" Amira thought for a moment before answering. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I look at what we built, all those women who get to dream because someone finally believed in them. And I realize, maybe I didn't walk away. Maybe I just found another way to heal." He smiled, eyes glistening. "You always did have a better definition of medicine than anyone else." She looked at him, voice barely above a whisper. "And you always had the better definition of love." From the foundation's glass windows, a warm light spilled across the street. Inside, dozens of women stood together. Doctors, students, patients, hands clasped, faces bright. The future Amira once feared was happening right before her eyes. For every woman she had ever treated, for every girl who had once thought her dreams too expensive, there was now a door open, and it had her name on it. Ethan turned toward her, his voice quiet. "Look at them." "I am," she said softly. "They're the heartbeat." "And you," he added, "are the rhythm." She laughed through her tears. "That might be the most poetic thing you've ever said." "Don't get used to it," he teased, though his voice cracked halfway through. Later, when the crowd had gone and the city began to sleep, Amira stood alone in the hall of the new foundation. The air still carried the echo of applause. She looked up at the wall behind the stage, where a quote had been engraved in bronze letters, "Ethan's choice," though she hadn't seen it until now. "Love does not come to save us, only to make us brave enough to stay." Her breath caught. For a moment, she was back in that cold operating room, her hand on his chest, his heartbeat finding its rhythm again. That was the night everything began. Not the surgery, not the miracle, but them. She turned as Ethan stepped into the hall, coat over his arm. "You found it," he said. Her voice trembled. "You had this made." He shrugged. It felt true. She smiled through her tears. "It is." They stood beneath the words for a long moment, the doctor and the man she'd once called a patient, the survivor and the healer, the woman who stayed and the man who learned how. When he reached for her, she didn't pull away. The city outside glowed like a second sunrise, the kind that doesn't mark beginnings but continuations, proof that even after everything, hearts can still learn to beat again. True love doesn't come to change us. It gives us the courage to become who we already are. And if this story has touched you, remember, even a heart once broken can still find its rhythm again. One more time, for love.